The British government is in the midst of rewriting the country's laws on surveillance and national security through a piece of legislation called the Investigatory Powers Bill, or the IPB. And journalists have a big stake in this story. Over the past decade and a half, ever since the 9/11 attacks, the UK Parliament has invoked more than 65 different laws and measures to be used ostensibly to fight crime or terrorism. However, the ramifications for British reporters have included stop and search requests while on the job, mining of their digital data, secret monitoring of their communications, as well as evidence that some reporters have somehow ended up on police databases used to track extremists. This is all now coming to a head as Parliament debates the IPB, referred to by its critics as the Snoopers Charter. It's designed to pull together all laws governing how the government, police, and intelligence services can spy on citizens, including those in the media. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on surveillance measures in the UK and the relationship between the security state and the journalists who dare to challenge it.
Jason Parkinson is a British freelance video journalist who has been covering protest and documenting dissent for more than 10 years.
It's for your own safety!
He has all kinds of stories of journalists being intimidated, harassed, assaulted, even put under surveillance by special teams deployed by UK police forces, specifically to gather intelligence.
Can you do me a favour and turn it off, please, now?
It was starting to become very, very difficult for me to actually even get to a job where there was going to be police and police intelligence, because I would routinely be stopped.
Section 1 of PACE gives me the power to keep you here, to detain you for the purpose of the search.
A lot of the time it was just stop and account, sometimes it was stop and search. Around 2007 I think there was 21 to 23 stops.
Well, you've got the choice, okay? You either go away now or you spend the rest of the afternoon yourself. What do you want to do?
I always thought, even back in 2007, there's something going on here, and it's taken nearly 10 years of suspicion to actually now find out that there was something going on. Information has been held and retained, and these officers and these units know who we are, know who we're talking to, and know what we're doing.
So you got here, like,
Parkinson says a couple of years ago, a letter from London's Metropolitan Police landed on his doorstep, a response to something he had filed called a subject access request. Proof that he was indeed under surveillance because of the kind of work he does, and that information on him is being held on a number of domestic extremist databases.
The domestic extremism database is one of the most outrageous interferences with general civil liberties in this country, when you consider that journalists need to be at those places in order to do their job. And the fact that that somehow casts a veil of suspicion over them, I think, is really undermining the values that we would prize in this democracy.
Parkinson and 5 of his colleagues are now taking legal action against Scotland Yard, challenging the police's right to collect and retain their data, asking the court to order their files be erased and a policy established to protect all journalists from future state surveillance. Few of these incidents make news. One that relates to the leaks from former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. David Miranda, partner of Glenn Greenwald, who broke the Snowden story in the Guardian newspaper, was detained at Heathrow Airport under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act. He was held for 9 hours by security forces who seized his computer material. This past week, British judges ruled that Miranda's detention was legal under UK law, but incompatible with Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the section dealing with freedom of expression. Miranda and his many supporters claimed victory.
It was just an excuse to search him over and take whatever he had with him to find out what Snowden might have given away about Britain. And then we also had the Sun newspaper, normally a friend and proponent of much police activity, found itself the target of disproportionate, intrusive surveillance in order to combat reputational damage to the police. That is nothing to do with national security. It is an abuse of the protections of the press under the Convention of Human Rights. It should be unlawful and should be punished. But my recollection last time I looked was they got away with it.
David Omand is the former director of GCHQ, the communications headquarters of the UK's intelligence and security setup.
GCHQ will be perfectly entitled to obtain that metadata if they had sufficient purpose.
He is one of Britain's most experienced so-called securocrats, prepared to go on the record in defence of what he calls necessary and proportionate counter-terrorism measures relating to journalists.
You just have to get the mechanics right. And so the public's got to have confidence that if it gives these powerful tools and the legal authority to the police and intelligence agencies, it will be used responsibly. And so you've got to have some kind of oversight the public trusts. You've got to be certain that when powers are used, they are used responsibly.
Which brings us to the new Investigatory Powers Bill, or IPB, currently being debated in committee rooms behind me. In putting together the current draft, the Cameron government asked an independent reviewer to scrutinise more than 65 different pieces of existing terrorism legislation in an attempt to bring together all relevant surveillance measures under one law, overarching and transparent.
What is being said to the public and Parliament in Britain right now is trust us, trust the judges, trust the system, and many people want to. But what we have seen from the record is that over the period of 30, 40 years, they cannot be trusted.
I find the IPB petrifying. It expands the powers drastically. It expands hacking powers of the police and of the intelligence agencies, expands mass surveillance powers, and journalists are not given any specific protections under any of those new laws. So while the intention may have been to make the law clearer, in fact what we're seeing is a huge expansion of powers and no expansion of protection.
The prospect of unfettered state access to everything by human agents, malware planted in your mobile phone, malware planted in your computer, systematic surveillance and automatic networking of everyone you're in touch with is absolutely terrifying. And one uses this analogy hesitatingly from the point of view of a Gestapo or a Stasi. It's a dream come true.
The journalistic shorthand for the IPB is the Snoopers Charter. And that's not just the media critics, but those on the security side are pushing ahead.
I gave evidence to the different committees of the House of Commons. I couldn't find any gaps. No doubt the journalists, for example, will want tighter conditions under which journalistic material could be accessed. The authorities equally will probably push back against that. Actually, the most important thing is not what's on the face of the Act, it's the code of practice. That explains in plain English what the authorities are allowed to do and what they're not. So I think it will be much clearer for anyone who is worried about whether the state is going too far. They may still argue about it, but at least they'll all be arguing from knowing what they're talking about.
The British government is hoping to have the IPB passed by the end of the year. Its advocates are heralding its transparency, this idea that journalists will know when they're being surveilled and why. But the critics are concerned about something much more fundamental, the future of journalism in the UK.
Journalists are really feeling the effects of mass surveillance. I think that its impact will probably be long-term, and we'll only really come to realise the implications of building this surveillance society, looking back in 10, 15 years' time and trying to understand why we didn't have as many investigatory journalists out there, why we didn't have as many exposés, why we didn't have as many whistleblowers, why we didn't have as many sources coming forward. I think that those are really the tangible impacts that we're going to see in the long term.